I would like to offer my sincere thanks to museum curator Rachel Frisbee for her amazing wall paintings that you will see and the inspired job she has done in hanging this exhibit. I would also like to thank the board of the Polasek Museum for making this exhibit possible, and special thanks to our friend Tom Olsen for agreeing to record this presentation, which will be uploaded to YouTube for the Pacific Scholars Lecture Series. Please let me know at any time if you can't hear me. That's unlikely in this venue. And feel free to ask questions as we go along. This collection, numbering over 1,200 objects, of which over 400 are on display here, has been gathered over a period of more than 30 years. Each object has been numbered, cataloged, and meticulously researched. Since the 1908-1910 German Sudsea expedition, which toured Micronesia, documenting its material culture, relatively little additional information has been published on this topic, making Micronesia a productive area for collection and research, with a focus on how these crafts have changed and evolved over the last century. Where is Micronesia? Here's when I get to get out my love stick pointer. You'll notice that China is here to the northwest, Japan is to the north. Basically, Polynesia is over here. This is not Polynesia. This is a separate area. Polynesia means many islands. Down here is Melanesia with New Guinea. Australia is over here. Indonesia and the Philippines actually are very close. There's a lot of relationship culturally between the Philippines and Micronesia. The word Micronesia means tiny islands. And in Micronesia, a total of 2,000 individual islands encompass no more than 1,000 square miles in area. Guam, the largest island, is 225 square miles, while in contrast, many atolls may be no more than a quarter of a square mile in size. 4 main island groups include the Mariana Islands, which includes Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, and most people are familiar with Guam. The Caroline Islands, otherwise known as the Federated States of Micronesia, which include Yap, Chuuk, Ponape, and Kasrai, as well as the Republic of Palau, which is actually separate from the Federated States of Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, and the Gilbert Islands, including Kiribati and Tuvalu. This last group is unique for being in political association with Australia rather than the United States. There are 2 main types of Micronesian island environments. Volcanic or high islands are characterized by mountains, water sources such as waterfalls and streams, and large trees, which can be used to manufacture canoes. Low-lying atolls, on the other hand, consist of a ring of coral which has grown up on top of a submerged mountain or extinct volcano, with a central lagoon. Such islands have very limited resources and often limited groundwater availability. Virtually all the islands in Micronesia lack stone appropriate for tools, and none have metal. Therefore, prior to culture contact, they were obliged to use shell adzes and other shell, wood, or coral tools. Many low-lying islands even lack adequate wood for carving, and only a few islands had appropriate clay for making pottery. Obviously, this lack of resources has a big influence on the type of handicrafts which are and traditional culture that these islands are able to produce. Even before contact with Europeans, islands maintained relationships with each other, and special handicrafts were manufactured as objects of value and exchange. Low-lying islands were dependent on higher islands in time of need. When one island got hit with a tidal wave or typhoon and lost its coconut palms, taro gardens, and fresh water through saltwater intrusion, refugees would need to go to another island for food. To maintain this obligation, smaller islands between Yap and Chuuk brought specialized products, including beaded belts and woven lava as tribute to Yap. And this particular picture is from Palau, from the Rock Islands. Micronesia is thought to have been populated approximately 3,500 to 4,000 years BP, that's before the present, through drift voyages or planned migrations. Canoes that populated these islands came from island Southeast Asia, Taiwan, or the Philippines, along with sporadic incursions from Melanesia. Outrigger canoes, found both in island Southeast Asia and the Philippines, would have allowed intrepid voyagers to reach Micronesia. In Micronesia, each island group has its own unique style of outrigger canoe, and often several distinctive styles for different purposes, such as fishing within the lagoon, warfare, and long voyages. Distinctive styles of canoes from different island groups can be seen in the exhibit. I really got into collecting, the different canoes, so to the point where we didn't actually have room for all the canoes. I had to take some of the canoes back. Canoes and other objects were carved with tools using the only materials available, wood, shell, and coral. Some of these objects, especially shell adzes and other tools, probably date back to the Lot era, about 1,000 to 250 years ago. They include adzes made from tridacna or giant clam shells and terebra shells, as well as shell scrapers. These would be the adzes here. This is tridacna adzes. These are from terebra shells, and as well as shell scrapers, and that's from some kind of a whelk, I believe, and polishing stones made from coral and pumice. The partially fossilized Triton's trumpet shell would have been used to communicate over long distances, and I mean it really makes a pretty loud noise. It's surprising. Wooden objects such as the large wooden pounder shown here and the wooden bowls are probably well over 100 years old. There's an interesting story associated with the acquisition of the artifacts illustrated on this slide. It was 1944, and MacArthur's troops were massing in preparation for an attack on the Philippines. Naval forces under Admiral Chester Nimitz swept through the Central Pacific, past Chuuk and the Carolines. They were looking for locations which could act as platforms to allow the B-29 or Superfortress bombers to carry out a direct assault against Japan. Saipan was invaded June 15, 1944, and 1 week later the Japanese airfield had been captured. By August, Guam and Tinian were also secure, and the Seabees were hard at work on Saipan, constructing the huge air base which would allow B-29s to begin strategic bombings. A naval air station was constructed on the north end of Saipan, while pits were dug to obtain sand for construction in a number of locations. Altogether, very little of the surface substrate of Saipan was left undisturbed. Donald Witt was one of those Seabees hard at work transforming Saipan into a strategic platform. He was also an amateur archaeologist who collected a number of Clovis points on the south shore of Tulare Lake in the San Joaquin Valley of California. When the Seabees began bulldozing the airport runways in Saipan, Donald Witt recognized that archaeological and historic material was being turned up and made a surface collection of the Lat period artifacts seen here. Without his intervention, these materials, which were so haphazardly revealed, would likely not have been preserved. The Witts gave me this collection after I initially purchased a hair comb from them on eBay and was able to describe its origin. This is a good example of some of the exciting discoveries I've come across in the course of my collecting journey. European trade ships brought important goods to exchange with Micronesians, especially the precious metal which they could obtain in no other way. This watercolor by contemporary artist Tommy Tamaragung illustrates Micronesians trading with ships in early times, in effect, trading with tradition, as the title of my first book reflects. The Spaniard Magellan discovered Guam and Rota in 1521, so it was discovered before Polynesia, actually, and Micronesia was later recognized by the Vatican as a possession of Spain in 1855. During this long period, most of the smaller islands received infrequent and sporadic contact from European ships, which stopped to obtain water or fresh fruit. Micronesians traded with what they had available, including coconut meat, sea cucumbers, and sandalwood, which traders later exchanged in the East for luxury goods such as silk and porcelain. Germany bought Micronesia from Spain in 1844 when Spain needed money to make up for the cost of the Spanish-American War. Germany's influence on Micronesia included the continued promotion of Christianity and in Palau a ban on the building of further buys or men's houses, which were thought to divert attention from more constructive activities like road building and you know how Germans are. The German period was marked by an expansion of trade and the collection and documentation of Micronesian material culture, which can be viewed in many German museums today. This photo shows an exhibit case from the Berlin Museum, which I have yet to visit. I would very much like to visit, which includes many Palauan and other Micronesian bowls in the foreground. This is like a tarot table here. These are probably not Palauan. Those are probably like from Chuk or Ponape, something like that. And also the photos of the inside of a Palauan men's house, the rafters from the inside of a Palauan men's house in the background. And this figure here is called a Dilakai, and it was considered indecent enough that the Germans basically made them take them down from their buy because they felt they found it to be offensive. But anyway, and then they collected them and hung them up in their museum, but that was okay. Okay. In 1919, after World War I, the Japanese were awarded Micronesia in a decision by the League of Nations. Afterwards, many Japanese immigrated to Micronesia and set up businesses, including fisheries, pearl culture, plantations, and phosphate mining. Palau was established as a regional capital of the Japanese territory, where the Japanese also founded a handicrafts museum. Other Japanese visited the islands as part of a burgeoning tourist industry. The Japanese promoted handicraft production, sending instructors to different islands, developing different handicraft products, and setting strict standards that sometimes involved physical punishment if production quotas weren't made. Some Japanese became enthusiastic collectors of Micronesian handicrafts. This photo shows a Faiz Islander named Mole who is visiting a family in Japan. Whether as part of an official culture program or perhaps just because they've become friends, we don't know. But you can see different Micronesian handicrafts on display in the Japanese home in the background, including these are Palauan bowls that have been painted with a picture. These are Mortlock Island masks here, and down here you can see some Ulithi statues. So they're obviously enthusiastic collectors. I thought that was kind of interesting. Many such crafts were made throughout Micronesia during the Japanese period. The production of fans became especially well established on low-lying atolls where plant materials were abundant. This group of elaborate hand fans is decorated with panels of tortoise shell and inserts of kamej made from the new shoots of coconut palms and woven into designs using techniques derived from Tenerife lace techniques. This intricate style of fan appears to have evolved in the latter part of the Japanese period. These were the fans American servicemen bought as souvenirs in the early days after Japan's defeat in World War II. They were very different from the plain fire fans used to start a fire quickly in the bush, or the woven Marshallese fans which incorporated decorative borders derived from mat designs which Germans collected at the beginning of the 20th century. Today, many island areas have as many as 6 or 7 distinct fans designs. Due to the easy availability of plant materials in Micronesia, fans, baskets, mats, and other woven objects are important handicraft products, providing valuable financial resources to women living on remote atolls. After the passage of the Endangered Species Act in the 70s, tortoiseshell is no longer included in Micronesian fans. The tremendous variety of fan styles and designs is explored in greater detail in my recent book, Woven Hand Fans of Micronesia. A little plug there. Art historians and auction houses have traditionally placed high value on oceanic objects which were collected at the time of initial contact, for example, during Captain Cook's voyage. However, just like European art, indigenous art tends to change and evolve through time. This phenomena has been a focus for my evaluation of Micronesian handicrafts from the 19th and throughout the 20th century. The storyboard is a good example of the evolution of style through time. During the German period, storyboard motifs could be seen painted on the gables of the Bai or men's clubhouses, as well as on the internal beams or rafters. In the absence of written language, pictures carved and painted on the beams of the Bai recorded historic incidents, promoted traditional values, and preserved myths and stories, while sometimes humorously shaming rival villages. These early decorations were traditionally painted in 4 naturally available pigments: white, black, red, and yellow. In the early clubhouses, the area surrounding figures and other elements of the boards were carved out and filled with lime, as can be seen in these rafter boards collected from a Bai by the Dresden Museum in the 1860s. Unfortunately, these examples were later destroyed during World War II. But they did save these pictures. And see, you can see this white area surrounding the figures. That's actually been carved out and filled with lime. During the Japanese period, the Japanese ethnographer Hidekata Hisakatsu taught carvers to make small boards which illustrated a limited number of stories in traditional styles. The Japanese period storyboards shown here as part of the collection, these can be viewed in the exhibit. The top board was obtained in an Asian antique shop and probably dates to early in the Japanese period when figures were still being accentuated using lime in the traditional way. And see, they're dug out. This is a very early board. I was very excited to get that. The second board was obtained during World War II as war booty on Guadalcanal. And Guadalcanal is actually part of the Solomon Islands, but Palau was capital of the Japanese Empire in the area, so this guy would have been carrying this as a souvenir with him. Here you can see lime is no longer being used to surround the figures in this small board, which illustrates a headhunting scene. Yes, they did do some headhunting over there. Immediately after World War II, Micronesia was managed by the Navy, and the boards which were produced from the late 1940s through the 50s often had small figures and trees incised against the background of natural wood on a narrow board which included additional colors, as in the top example shown here, referred to as a new style board in Earl Wesley Jernigan's doctoral thesis. So this is actually they're usually longer than this. This is a very short, because I needed it. I mean, you can't photograph these things when they're 5 feet long. It's very difficult. So this is a shorter example. Normally they would be 5 feet long, but this board illustrates the story of the egg-laying cycle of the turtle. As time went on, figures, buildings, and foliage began to fill up every inch of the board, as can be seen in the middle transitional example, which illustrates the story of the chief whose wife has eels, which I can. It's a little crazy, but I can share it with you later when we tour through the exhibit. Then in the 1960s, painted boards with stylized designs, such as this example on the bottom by the carver Nirabu, became popular, and this one illustrates the story of trailing the coconut frond. As servicemen began to leave the islands, potential customers were limited to the administrators, and others who remained under the Department of Interior's management. At this point, extremely large luxury boards began to be made as souvenirs to cater to this limited market. Carvers also began to sign their boards and develop unique styles from which individual artists can be identified. The actual story on a board is portrayed in a number of different ways. It may be illustrated in one scene, which includes the central objects in the plot. This one here, if you see, for example, this is a series of scenes. Like this would be one scene, that would be one scene, that would be one scene. It's like maybe 3 scenes in there. And this one's probably got 3 scenes. This one is illustrated in just one scene. And this one is the one where this guy is fishing, and they do this form of fishing where they use coconut palm leaves, and they form a circle, and it scares the fish. And they all get there, and they scare the fish, and they bring them in, and then they can net the fish. And this guy was doing that when a raiding war party pulled into the village, and he jumped up and ran to warn the village, and he forgot to let go of the coconut frond. So he's running through the village, dragging this coconut frond behind him, and so they appreciated him warning them, but they all gave him a hard time afterwards for doing that. So that's that story. But sometimes the scenes can go from left to right, and sometimes they can go from right to left, probably because of the Japanese, obviously, they read the opposite direction, so they learned to portray stories both ways. Ultimately, unpainted boards began to be produced, which were popular with American tourists. These are often referred to as prison style, since today they are carved and sold from the island jail. Yeah, they let all those guys in there have carving tools, go figure. The island jail shop is illustrated on the left. I got that off the internet. And these boards may be in the shape of fish, turtles, other sea creatures. You can see swordfish and rays and bumphead parrotfish and dolphins, all kinds of things. The board on the upper right illustrates the story of the Amelik snake, while the board on the lower right illustrates the breadfruit tree story. And you can see here, this is a technique that was used by a specific carver who used like shoe polish and stuff, and he did this coloring, this slight coloring to the board, even though it was a natural board, whereas this one is just all natural, but then he's done different scenes in different quadrants of the board. Born in 1894, Charles Gibbons' life spanned 4 colonial administrations in Palau, a period which ushered in many changes. He worked as a translator, as an assistant to visiting scientists, as an important chief or rubak, as a storyboard artist, and finally, at 70 years old, he began to draw beautiful, detailed watercolor folk art scenes of traditional Palauan life. A description of the artist, his family history, and his important contributions to the folk art of Palau is detailed in my book, co-authored with Hara Ware-Owen, Painting Palau's Cultural History, The Life and Works of Folk Artist Charles Gibbons. Several of examples of his work can be viewed in the exhibit. Figural sculpture has been a special focus of my collection. Most books on oceanic art cover Micronesia in only a few pages and perpetuate a false belief that Micronesia lacks a significant tradition of figural representation. The truth is, nearly every Micronesian island has its own tradition of figural sculpture, with the exception of the Marshall Islands, where appropriate wood for carving is in really short supply. The illustration on the left was taken by German administrator George Fritz in 1905. It shows Palauan women dancing with statues on their heads. Statues were removed from their shrines and danced in conjunction with rook dances or myrrh feasts. By the late 1800s, statue pairs were being sold to Germans as souvenirs in Yap, but the evidence suggests that they may also have had cultural significance as a way to propitiate or communicate with ancestors or gods in early times. And the photo on the right portrays the well-known carver Guar. He's actually from Ulithi, which is an atoll near Yap, and his detailed figure pairs can be seen in many museums, including the current exhibit. Male-female statue pairs with traditional tattoos or in traditional dress with accessories are found throughout the Caroline Islands. The figure pair on the left is identical to a pair in the Smithsonian, although actually my example has a skirt. Theirs is missing its skirt, so. It probably dates to the 1930s or earlier, and it was collected in an antique shop in the Far East. The middle statue were collected on Kutu Island in the Mortlocks of Chuuk State, and they were originally purchased by Frankie Teal Mayo, who was postmistress there from 1951 to 1957. And that's what I try to do. I try to get the name of the person who owned the object and what time were they in Micronesia, because that really helps me, date that specific object. They are a rare traditional style related to the large masks which were once produced in the Mortlock Islands to protect the breadfruit crop. Several examples of this figure style can also be seen in the exhibit. During World War II, figure pairs such as the one on the right here were made in Saipan, in prisoner of war camps, especially Camp Susupe, and they may have been produced by the famous Saipan carver Segundo Blas, and I'm still trying to get in touch with his relatives to find out more about exactly what he carved during that period. I believe he's deceased, but he has children that are still alive. The male-female statue pair depicted on the left are exceptionally well-executed examples of Palauan statuary. Such figures are usually of dark wood with inlaid mother-of-pearl eyes. Women carry babies, purses, digging sticks, baskets, or bowls, as does this example. Men carry clubs, spears, fish, and suspended from a stick, coconuts for holding water or palm wine, and sometimes captured heads. I've got one that's got heads. The pair of statues on the right was purchased in 2004 at the 9th Festival of Pacific Art by the carver Leo Pedro. And one of the reasons I got it was because it illustrates the traditional tattoos of Sanseral. So I thought he did a great job. Mandy Epison, who has her own museum there, really she has examples of his carving, and she really values his carving. So he's kind of a talented carver of the time. A Micronesian squatting figure, often referred to as a monkey man, was one of the first Micronesian figures I acquired. I began researching the obscure origin and purpose of these figures, ultimately writing an article for Tribal Arts magazine entitled From Sacred to Souvenir, the Squatting Figure as a Motif in Micronesian Art. These figures were thought to have significance both as household or ancestor figures and as companions to accompany the dead, which were included in canoe burials. 3 very different styles of squatting figure are illustrated here. Each of these figures can be found in a number of related styles. The first, probably from Toby Island in the Republic of Palau, is nearly identical to an example in the Metropolitan Museum. The middle example is from Nulu and is also sometimes referred to as a Nulu frogman, while the figure on the far right is from Ulithi. And you can identify the differences in these styles by the shape of the eyes. Usually the Toby style has like an almond-shaped eye. The Nulu always seems to have eyebrows, and both of these are more like fertility figures, and they've got very fat stomachs and so forth. Micronesia is also known for its many forms of limited purpose or specialized money. Such forms of money are usually used in traditional contexts such as weddings, funerals, and cultural celebrations. Yap is best known for its large wheels of stone money, but also has several different forms of shell money, including the example shown here. Palau uses certain forms of valuable antique beads along with sections of bracelets pierced and used as necklaces, which are thought to have originated from Bronze Age Chinese tombs dating back to as early as 500 BC. Palauans also exchanged tortoiseshell dishes called tluk, and I could have done like a whole presentation on Micronesian money. I mean, there's so many different forms of money. It's a very interesting topic. Other objects were also used as limited purpose or trade objects on different islands, including lengths of rope and weavings such as lava lava. You can imagine how a length of rope would become equivalent to money because these Europeans are coming in with their ships, and they probably need more rope, and they made beautiful rope in these islands, so that would be an important medium of exchange. Yeah, what did I do? Okay, all right, I think that's correct. In the islands between Yap and Chuuk, skirts called lava lava are still woven on backstrap looms, especially in Feis and Ulithi. The first record of the backstrap loom is depicted on 2,500-year-old bronzes associated with the Dongsung culture, which apparently originated in China, south of the Yangtze River. The backstrap loom then spread south to Vietnam and Thailand, from where it diffused through island Southeast Asia and finally into Micronesia. Interestingly, the backstrap loom is also found throughout Central and South America, leading us to speculate regarding possible early contacts between East and West. Early lava lavas were woven from hibiscus and banana fibers, while later designs utilized cotton. One type of lava, an elaborate textile called a machi, and we have one of those in the collection, was given to chiefs and sometimes used as a burial cloth. This photo illustrates girls wearing cotton lava. The black and white belts seen on these dancers are generally made from glass or plastic beads today, but the traditional belts, including examples on display in this exhibit, were strung from handmade beads of tortoise, white shell, and coconut discs and were considered valuable heirlooms. The Marshall Islands are known for their beautifully woven fans, baskets, and mats. While today cotton muumuus are everyday wear, in the late 1800s, women wore clothing mats with elaborate borders like the ones shown here, which depicts photos from the German Sud-Sea expedition. And they had one mat that they would put in the middle of the mat and push it back like that, and then they would have a second mat that they would wear to the front. After a one-year trial in 2008, the current Mat Revival program got underway in 2011 with 9 young people who began an apprenticeship in an intensive course funded by the Republic of the Marshall Islands Training Council. At the same time, they learned marketing techniques and worked in handicraft shops, which partnered with the project. In the context of the Women's Weaving Circle, they also learned important cultural knowledge through interaction with older women weavers. Mats are an important part of Marshall Islands' cultural tradition, and through this program, a valuable aspect of their culture has been preserved. Handicrafts are continually changing and evolving. Missionaries, colonial governments, population migration from island to island, and the preferences of visitors have all had a part in these changes, which include the following 3 processes. Simplification occurs when a craft is produced in large quantities and loses detail over time, such as in many contemporary Marshall Islands fans, for example. Material assimilation is another process whereby Western materials such as pieces of cloth or plastic are incorporated into objects such as baskets and fans. This has been happening since the 1800s, especially in Pohnpei. Finally, the process of familiarization involves the incorporation of traditional motifs into objects familiar to Westerners, such as bookends, ashtrays, vases, lamps, or paper knives. One exhibit case in the exhibit here includes examples of this process. The model by or men's house on the left is actually a cigarette box. And what you would do is lift the lid off to fill the box with like filterless cigarettes. And then when you just lift it partially, a filterless cigarette rolls out onto this little platform here. Of course, you can tell that it was from the 40s, so they're smoking filterless cigarettes. The lamp shown in the center illustrates one of the fanciful figures often produced in Sancerol. It's currently being used to light our living room, and so it didn't make it into the exhibit. The final object is a folding bookend produced in Palau. The figures illustrated in the bookend are stylized versions of the support figures which were used in early Palauan men's houses or bai. In conclusion, please check out my sample books at the museum desk for more information about Micronesian handicrafts. Thanks to all of you for coming, and I'd be glad to take questions at this time, and of course it'll be followed by a walkthrough of the exhibit, and I can answer more questions. There was this chief that noticed every time he had sex with his wife, he had these little, like, bites, these little bite marks all over him, and he was like, "What's going on here?" And so then he talked to his friends or whatever, and they go, "Well, we think your wife has eels." And he's like, "Well, what am I going to do? I mean, we can't do this." So they said, "Well, we're going to get this bowl." They got this bowl filled with these tiny fish, and they have her sit on the bowl, and the eels come out to grab the fish, and they hook them. See, they're hooking the eels. That's how. A lot of these stories are pretty bawdy. This one is like the Romeo and Juliet story of Palau. It's the story of Suresh and Dalai. And what happened with this one was Suresh and Dalai loved each other so much. They were incredible lovers. But then, unfortunately, this powerful chief saw I guess it's Delay, he's Suresh and she's Delay, saw Delay and said, bring that woman to me, and he was going to make her his wife. And if the chief says that, you can't say no. You can't say no. So he said, so she said, no, I would rather die than go to the chief. I want to stay with you. So what he does is he meets the letter of the law. He cuts off her head and brings her head to the chief. And it's like, you said you wanted to see her. Here she is, you know. It's like, I know, it's pretty nasty, but there you go. That's their love story. What can I say?
Can you tell me about my favorite one up there?
This one on the very top?
With the blue and the bat.
Oh, the blue with the bat. Okay, that's the story of the lesson of the heron. And this really huge one down here with the mother pearl is also that same story. But in this story, a man with wings harasses all the islanders, and he flies over them and attacks them, and they can't do anything about it because he's flying. And so everyone's like running away from him. And finally, this one guy notices what the heron does when it fishes. It goes step, step, and then it goes and spears the fish. So he did that with his spear. Here he is. Right. He's going step, step, and then blam, he hit it and killed it. So he was famous for that. So that's the lesson of the heron.
Were some of these boards bigger than this ones?
Those down here are
Those are the biggest?
they get to be about 6 feet long, maybe 7 feet long, not too much bigger than that. I mean, they've got to be all shipped back to the States, you know, so that did put a little bit of a restraint on what size they would be. I kind of like this one up here, the story of the foolish man who lost his fish traps. He put his fish traps down, and you're supposed to triangulate the location that you left the fish traps with the hills of the islands surrounding you. Instead, he used the clouds. So when he came back, of course, he couldn't find his fish traps.
These are beautiful.
Yeah, those are Chuukese clubs, and they're very famous. They call them bullhorn clubs because of the little.
He really did.
Yeah, you would not want to be hit with that club. The Chuukese were known for being really vicious warriors for a long time. People were like afraid to go there until they finally missionized them. But here's the story of Yappi's money. See these big circles of money? The Yappies actually came to Palau and mined the money, which was a form of calcite. They did not have that on their island, so they mined it on Palau. And they brought these huge wheels of money back, and a lot of times they went down with the ship and people were killed. And that when they had a really rough time bringing back the money, that's when they valued that money more. See, now here's another example of the story of in various sections of the coconut frond, pulling the coconut frond. See, there he is. The war party comes in, and it's in a series of stories from left to right. And there's just a lot of different artists. Like these two are by Osik. Some of these you can't really tell because at the time the style was so generic. These are like all from like right after World War II. This style of board here.
So did you find these online, or how did you happen to find these?
Different ways. My friend Hera Owen was there in the 50s, and she thinks she sold me about 4 boards, and then there was.
But you didn't go there to get them?
They wouldn't be there.
Oh,
you know.
They'd be in different.
No, these were made in the past. These were made in the 1940s, so they're not making them like that anymore. Now, this one I got when I was there in 2004, and that's by the son of Nirabu. Nirabu is a very famous carver, and that's by Linus Nirabu, his son. And what I liked about this was finally they had to kill him because he was like. And when they I think they put hot stones in his mouth, and he turned into islands or something. This is the story of natural childbirth here, where the Palauans long ago they thought that the only way they could give birth was like by C-section, and finally the spider god came and told them how to give birth properly. That's another one of their legends.
I mean,
well, they are in a compact of free association with the United States of the Pacific, and we already didn't have those type of stopping places in World War II. We had Hawaii, but you know, when the Japanese attacked us before, not that they're going to attack us, but we can still get attacked from that. Okay, well, we can start here. We can talk about some of the storyboard stories. Does anyone have a specific one? You know, so it's a politically complicated, but it's a really small island. Like Palau is like what is it, like 60,000 people or something? It's like a town. You know, it's right, Russ? And it's not, what's the population of Palau, would you say? 60,000?
I'm not sure how many are left since I left.
Yeah, they're all gone now, Russ. They, you know. But anyway, yeah, so that's well, okay, that
you have to say it now.
well, that one, another version of the same story. Let me see if I can see it. If there's another version of it. Basically, this woman was swimming. You know, this guy raped me, and her husband goes, well, what did he look like? He was ready to go, you know, take care of business and get rid of this guy. She goes, the only thing I can remember about him is he had a really large organ. So he goes, all right, I know how I'm going to do this. So he got a aphrodisiac, and he had all the guys in the village drank this aphrodisiac. So then he was able to compare, and so he caught the guy just as he was going back to see his wife again. See, so here's the wife's hut here. She's lying in her hut, and that guy was trying to get to her again, the guy with the blue loincloth. Cut off his head. They have the... And it would be a specific person. They would go into the village, and they would all be sleeping in the bay, and it would be like a preemptive strike of this one person. So they went into the bay, this group of people from another village, because they're always fighting with each other, grabbed this guy, and they had him tied in the bottom. And I have a better version, but unfortunately it didn't make the... do have dugongs. So anyway, all these low-lying branches, and the rowers were looking and watching and everything. Well, this guy got loose from his bonds, and unbeknownst